You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and this could become a bit of an awkward episode as my co-host and I will trace our cinematic journeys this far and see if we have grown, I guess. Maybe that's the word for it. Do we like the same things we did when we first started shutting ourselves away into dark rooms, just staring at big screens? Or has something changed? And if so, has that change been for the better or for the worse? And perhaps more importantly, should we change? Is there a kind of step-by-step guide to cinephilia and taste, a kind of path most of us take? Or is growing, changing, and appreciating different kinds of films perhaps becoming more learned and insightful the true goal, or perhaps even inevitable? And if so, what is that triggers changes in taste? Is it age, life experiences, or just watching certain gateway drugs that open up new worlds? As yes, could it be that cinema can be described as a kind of drug, an addiction, where our immunity goes up and we need to get, well, a harder hit, I guess, like some kind of bigger dose, something more extreme to kind of scrape and grab some kind of joy and excitement from the medium? Is it the case that at one moment we're just happy-go-lucky Christopher Nolan or Greta Gerwig fans, then we suddenly get seduced by a Kubrick obsessive at a party, and just before you know it, you're tripping on Tarkovsky, Godard, Jodorowsky in some back alley somewhere, or, shooting up Ackerman, Tar in a toilet with the eventual destination of just staring blankly as Michael Snow zooms in on a painting for 45 minutes. Or can you just randomly get into Snow, Darren, Brackett, and Benning as a teenager with nothing better to do? And this whole journey thing is a whole crock of bull. Let's find out. With me today are three really interesting co-hosts for this episode, which I believe will have some pretty different tastes and pretty different journeys. I'm really happy to be joined again by Arthur and Ben, two co-hosts we've seen more and more of lately, as well as my regular co-host Saul, who just dive deeper into this, see if we're all just destined to become film snobs, or if there's a way for any of us to just watch cinema day in, day out for a decade, 2 decades, and still love the same films in exactly the same way. So my first question has to be this, and we can start in alphabetical order with you, Arthur. How much has your taste changed since you first got into cinema? Is there a complete split where you can barely recognize who you were, or do you feel like you enjoy pretty much the same things for pretty much the same reasons?
I'd say it'd be more of an array of stuff that I enjoy. I find, which could be a topic for later on when we talk about it more in depth, the websites that you would go on are kind of what your taste will turn into when you start taking the hobby more seriously. So because I use Richer Music for my film on top of I Check Movies, I ended up drifting towards the more experimental stuff later on. I'd say now I enjoy almost anything, where it'd be like Benning or other experimental works. Or for a recent example, I watched Cutthroat Island 2 days ago, and I thought that was fantastic too. But we'll definitely get deeper into the other topics about this.
All right, interesting. So essentially, your thesis is that it's some kind of peer pressure or social signals where you follow the rabbit hole of your choosing. That could very well be the case. What about you, Ben? Did you have similar rabbit hole you went down, or do you feel like you still enjoy the same kinds of film for the same kinds of reasons you did when you first got into cinema?
So there are, I see two specific touch points in my life that actually triggered a broadening of horizons. When I was a kid, I liked the stuff kids liked, animated movies, really broad comedies. When I was little, I loved Jim Carrey movies, for instance, Ace Ventura, we watched all the time. When my mom got married to my stepdad, he had this collection of recorded VHS tapes where he would rent movies and then record them onto a tape. Usually it's the 6-hour tapes. So he'd have like 3 movies on each tape. And his tastes were very much skewed toward really dumb direct-to-video action movies and horror movies. And so this was when I was around 12 or 13. I started watching a lot of those. And I still remember stuff like Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer and Wanted Dead or Alive and Extro. So that set off kind of one evolution in my taste. I always had an interest in things like horror and action, but I was never really allowed to because my parents were kind of religious and they just didn't want me watching R-rated movies. But now I had all these sitting around all the time and I would just, it was impossible to avoid them. When I went to college, my film collection, if you looked at my DVDs, they looked like pretty much every, male college student probably had 7 Fight Club in the early 2000s. But I took an intro to film criticism class, and that was probably the first time I remember being exposed to a lot of these foreign classics like La Dolce Vita, Vivre sa vie, The Bicycle Thief. There were, that's what kind of kickstarted a broadening of horizons further. And at that point, I started getting a lot more into the sorts of films Criterion was releasing. I got a lot more interested in experimental films. I remember watching a lot of things like Brackage in college. But then I also started getting deeper into horror as well. So it wasn't a discarding, similar to Arthur, it wasn't a discarding of the past. It was a broadening. It was taking what I was already watching and then layering on top of it. I feel like now, my tastes have kind of come full circle, and I've started to lose patience with some of the more pretentious. Like, I can't watch Brackage very much anymore. I just lose patience with it. It frustrates me. And if I can feel the pretension oozing off of a film, it just starts to rub me the wrong way. Whereas back then, it would have been something that would have fueled my interest further. So I think in a weird way, I've kind of come full circle into starting to enjoy cinema as a fun experience again. And that's not to say I only watch horror and action movies. I mean, I still love movies like In the Mood for Love and 8.5. It's just that there are certain movies that I've started to step away from or lose patience with.
That's really interesting to hear. Yeah, and I think that's an experience some of us have as well, where things that impressed us at one point because they felt new kind of loses their shine after a while. And
I would even also say that there may have also been this kind of expectation, right? You're supposed to like this. It's a great film. If you don't like it, something's wrong with you, right? The Godfather is the greatest film of all time. No, it's not. It's honestly too long and kind of dull in places. It has some fantastic scenes and it's well written. It's very well acted, but it is not the greatest film of all time. I wouldn't even put it in my top 50. But, again, it's that losing of pretension, peeling off the pretentious aspect of it. I'm not pretending to be a cineast. I like what I like, and I don't like what I don't like.
I love it, Ben. I think that's actually the counter thesis of what I was thinking that this episode could end up being, where we're all just sitting around talking about how we learn to stop worrying and start appreciating Brackage. But no, yeah, I think part of growing up is also the ability to stand by your own taste in one way or another. And indeed, you just no longer be influenced by what other people expect you to like. So that's a really interesting point. What about you, Saul? just to roll it back a little bit, though, feel free to comment on what Ben and Arthur both said as well in terms of the rabbit holes of peer pressure or suggestions. And honestly, a very similar story from Ben here, where he was feeling a bit of pressure to like certain things from the groups, communities he was interacting with. But then when he grew older, he realized that, no, actually, I don't like that as much as I thought. Did you share their experiences at all?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Before I go into some of the stuff which Ben and Arthur are talking about with broadening of horizons, I'll start off with the peer pressure issue, because you did propose that as part of the question, Chris, and it's something that I've been thinking of. I think with the peer pressure, when I was first getting really into film and I was on the IMDb message boards, there were certain films that were really propped up as being the best of all time, and I was kind of made to feel a little bit guilty or ashamed of not having as high ratings as them, as other people did. And what I think I've noticed in years since then is that I'm coming to actually appreciate those films more, because I'm watching it for the experience rather than watching it going like, oh, all these people have it in their top 10 of all time. A recent example that I can give is that I recently saw Mulholland Drive on the big screen. They were showing a 35mm print of it, and it was the first time I'd seen the film since around 2002 or 2003. And when it first came out, just everybody was saying, it's the best film of all time, and people were writing all these essays about it. And there was one person on IMDb who had this like alphabeticalized list of all these different clues and hints that show what the twist is and how the story goes. And that was just really, it put me off the film for 20 years. I mean, we're in 2024, so it'd been over 20 years since I'd seen it, just because I was so put off by how picked apart and heavily analyzed it was by all of my IMDb message board buddies back in the day. But watching the film on the big screen recently, I just let the experience wash over me, and I appreciate the film a lot more, because I wasn't sort of looking like, I need to put all these puzzle pieces together. I was just looking for the interesting themes and issues and how they work together. The Mulholland Drive example I thought was interesting, because it's about the expectations, what Ben was saying about The Godfather. Although I do love The Godfather, is in my top 50 of all time. The expectations is a big thing, and I think when I was first getting into cinema, you've got all these films which you mentally peg as being overrated because people are saying it's the best of all time, and you're not actually liking it yourself that much at the time. You've got films like Taxi Driver, which for me was originally one of those big overrated films, but it's now in my top 20 of all time after a few rewatches and not really letting the hype get to you. So I guess that's one of the big things for me. Probably the biggest difference is leaving the IMDb message boards behind, leaving all that peer pressure to like certain films, and just having that experience yourself and enjoying the experience of the film, rather than going, afterwards I'm going to have to justify why I get this an 8 or 9 out of 10 rather than a 10 out of 10. I just like experiencing films. So I guess that's the biggest evolution for me. Going back to the topic of broadening horizons, I do feel that my taste in films has broadened over the years. Definitely, like Ben, I took some film classes. I was studying film for a bit. I did a unit on documentaries, which really helped my appreciation of the documentary genre. At the same time, though, it didn't really expand my take on world cinema, because I was really big into world cinema before I went to uni, but documentary was just one area that I did get that broadened horizons on. But what I'll just say is that even with broadened horizons, and even with me really liking Michael Snow and the occasional Stan Brakhage film, even with that, I think with the broadening of horizons comes down with a narrowing of what piques my interest. So I think my horizons are broadened. I think I'm watching a greater variety of different sorts of films than I was 20 years ago. But I think the films that are piquing my interest have narrowed down quite a bit as I've come to really understand what I'm looking for when I'm seeing a certain sort of film. What about you, Chris?
That's a really interesting point there. So because I've actually gone down a somewhat similar path there, where I become more picky about what I'm watching. I think I touched a little bit about this in the How We Got Into Cinema episode, I believe. But essentially, as I've grown older, the less interested I've been in just keeping up with every single film that people are talking about, just to be part of those conversations. So unless we're actually going to be discussing it in, like on this podcast, I'm not usually going to go out of my way to watch every single huge film that comes out every year. So I, for instance, started ditching most of the big blockbusters because that's one of the things that, like most of them, like Marvel, for instance, I've kind of faded out of interest with. I'm not just going to keep up with every single thing just because it's trendy. In terms of peer pressure, I don't think I ever actually felt that part of it. That's really interesting. I mean, I was on IMDb, like you saw on Film General, and definitely, like, I can see why you felt that way, because I remember when I first joined, like there was a lot of people just being really, really rude if you liked the wrong film or you disliked the wrong film as well. So if you had like a view that was slightly out of the norm, you could really get pummeled there. And I definitely got pummeled on more than one occasion. So that's not very nice. And that's, if the peer pressure worked in any way, it was probably to seek out those films that everyone else loved as well. So, like, to some extent or another, the IMDb approach definitely formed my taste in a similar way to what Arthur was talking about, in that, the community you join, they're going to be a rabbit hole a little bit. I can definitely feel that part. I didn't expect any of us to go all the way back to our childhood like Ben did, but yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was a kid, like, yeah, Jim Carrey, definitely Ace Ventura, those films, a lot of Mr. Bean I loved as a kid, like a lot of Disney, random Disney stuff, usually what kids are into. But I don't know, by the time I was a teenager and by the time I became into cinema, it was a really, really quick process. Like, I remember there were a few films that opened me up to the fact that older films could be interesting, because like most teenagers, I was mainly watching films made the last 10-20 years. But I remember, I think I mentioned this in the How We Got Into Cinema episode as well, so I'm not going to retrace the steps, but like when I went to media communication, I was around 16 years old probably. It's like more specialized. It's like college or high school, like mixed into one, because the Norwegian system is different. Like they showed a lot of classics. Like they showed Monty Python, and they showed Citizen Kane, and they showed Psycho, etc. And I started realizing that, hey, these films are really, really good, and they were better than most of what I was watching already. So I kind of just like jumped on and started watching things. And for a short time there, almost everything in black and white, for instance, was interesting and exciting just because it was black and white. Like I was watching and loving like the Frankenstein sequels, like even thoroughly enjoying like not just the first couple, but like House of Frankenstein, those like at the end of the road, where at the lowest budget possible, I was still thinking, wow, this is really cool. Just because it felt that different from what I had been watching. And as I was watching more and more and more, obviously, but I learned like what was normal, what was not, the standard changed, novelty wore off. It would be interesting to know if similar things happened to you guys too, where the novelty just wears off. I in my mind, that's a large part of what happens when you get into cinema. That's at least part of my thesis, that no matter what, like, even if you're a horror fan or a Western fan, let's just go with Western fans. Like, even if you're a Western fan when you're 16, it's the 1950s, you love Westerns, you still love Westerns in 2024. I think that if you've been watching hundreds of westerns every year, something has changed. I'm pretty sure that for every single person, if they watch something and consume something long enough, I think that you will start appreciating it for slightly different reasons. And that's one of the things that happened as I was getting more and more into cinema too. Like, I started to really like narrative cinema that took familiar twists and turns and turned them on their head. Right? I wanted some kind of originality, something I hadn't really seen before. Then I started getting more and more into like, what's that type of way of filming this or shooting this? And I got more interested in just how the things were done themselves and the form. And I think like that was probably a period of like 4, 5, 6 years at the beginning of my cinematic journey. And that was a huge, huge turnaround from being mainly interested in probably like a lot of classic Hollywood, and a lot of new Hollywood, which I still love all of those films. That hasn't really changed, but my interest has to a point. So I went from just really digging classical, digging new Hollywood, to getting more into new wave stuff, to fairly into art house. And the art house thing hasn't really changed. So in some ways, I've been a little bit static in the last 10 years, though even there, my preferences have changed. So I remember like a decade ago, and I'm sorry, I'm going on for too long. Like a decade ago, I was really just interested in how the things were done. Like, how fresh was this? Like, watching a movie was a bit like listening to a song. It was just all about like the rhythm and the music and the cool things it did. Though more lately, I've started to feel that usually I also need a little bit, I'm not going to say meaning per se, like that sounds a little bit too pretentious, but I wanted to like be about something. The something can be the form itself too, but I wanted to have something a little bit extra, something a little bit more punchy than just, hey, that's a cool shot. So that's probably the biggest thing that changed in the last decade for me. Oh, and I've also gotten more into minimalist films in some ways, and in some ways not so much, which I'll go into a little bit later as well. But since I've been talking way too long, I would love to hear from you again, Arthur. What would you say is the biggest change you can pinpoint in terms of what you enjoy or don't enjoy, as in today versus what you once did?
I'll start off with a side fact, because everyone was mentioning their childhood films. My family was pretty open with allowing me to watch almost anything. So when I was 6 years old, my favorite film was the second Terminator film, which is actually kind of amusing. And then when I was in grade 6, which I think I was 11, a friend was like, hey, want to see a movie with me? And it was Requiem for a Dream, which I don't know if an 11-year-old should watch that.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I figured a lot of them have to do with specific life events. The biggest thing would be in my 20s, since I think we talked about in the last podcast that we were all like the kind of anti-people, nihilist kind of people, which is probably just a very common 20s thing when you start getting your first adult existential crisis. And once you get over that, I find that I'm a lot more open to things. I guess my best summary now would be that I judge stuff based on their strengths and then kind of build on top of that. So if it's something that doesn't have a plot, I'm going to completely ignore that, because like there's no point complaining about the lack of one. And because of that, I notice I give a lot more higher ratings on average, but really, is that a bad thing?
No, not at all. I mean, that's actually a really interesting step as well. Just learning to love and appreciate things on their own terms. I think that's pretty much what I've always been drawn to as well, in the sense that I've always felt that cinema can be pretty much anything, and it's kind of weird to judge something on something it's not. I mean, you can have a fantastic film without a plot. You can have a fantastic film without even a human being on screen. I would struggle to think of one, but I think, like, oh yeah, that short film by Disney, The Dot and the Line. I mean, that's dialogue, but it's a romance between a dot and the line. Oh, and there are obviously some experimental films too, which are all about colors and lights, and that can also be absolutely great. So you don't need like a film can be about anything, and if it's not there, it doesn't need to be there. It's like judging rock music for not having a guitar. It doesn't make sense. So I definitely feel you there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's like Arthur. That's something that I've definitely seen in myself as I've gotten older, is learning to appreciate a film for what it is and not what it isn't. I try to find the good in things. It's very easy to go into a film with a negative attitude and crap all over it. It's a lot harder to try to appreciate it for what it's trying to do. Even these like super low budget, crappy horror movies, there's usually something in there, whether it's a shot or a particular actor who's, punching above their weight, or something that you can kind of latch onto to say, you know what, they're trying. They're making a movie, and that's something I've never done and probably never will. And you've got to appreciate that on a certain base level, even if it's not your cup of tea.
All right, not that forgiving I've never been, but good on you.
Yeah, because Flavo is watching a lot of horror and action stuff, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I notice with horror films, they tend to be some of the most sincere works out there and self-indulgent in almost a good way, because it's just one or a small group of people with minimal budgets just being incredibly ambitious and wanting to do whatever they want. And it ends up being one of the more interesting works of the genre, I'd say, or one of the more interesting works of not only the entire genre, but of cinema. Yeah, Sol, I didn't hear you talk about your childhood films. Maybe you can quickly mention those?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've really got much interesting to say beyond what I've talked about in other podcasts, but one of my big childhood films that I mentioned before is Home Alone, and it did traumatize me a little bit growing up, because I kept thinking there's always people out watching a house looking to break in. I think as a kid, I appreciated the first two Home Alone films, mostly for their comedic timing and just the cleverness with the way some of the gags are executed. For instance, the way that he plays this VHS tape really loudly, and it sounds to the burglars outside like there's somebody inside threatening them, and it's about to like shoot their gun. Like that to me, I just rewatched the film quite recently, the first one a couple of months ago, and to me that's still very funny and very well executed. But I guess I also sort of appreciate the film nowadays for the reasons why it traumatized me, for what it does do about what it does show about anxiety and worry and fear, and that there's people out there and trying to be resourceful. I look at it and I appreciate it also from a different point of view. And I guess there's some other films also where I've changed a little bit why I appreciate it. I mean, on the subject of horror, I've loved The Nightmare on Elm Street ever since I first saw it when I was around, I guess, 12 or 13 years old. And at that time was mainly for the creativity of it, the idea that something in a dream could kill you. That was just a fascinating idea for me, and being able to bring something out of a dream into reality. Whereas I guess these days when I watch it, yes, that's a big thing, but it's also about the kids being disbelieved by their parents, and that feeling of desperation and not being able to do anything, not being believed, and also the insomnia and those sort of things, which I've experienced a bit myself over the years. All those things, the sleeplessness, and it's quite interesting. I find other reasons to still latch onto it.
Can you pinpoint, like, what do you think is the biggest change in your taste from either from when you were a kid, though that might be a bit too easy, or from when you first got properly into cinema? Like, what would you say is the biggest thing that has changed?
I think the biggest thing that's changed for me that I've noticed is that these days I prefer films that are open-ended and ambiguous, whereas when I was first really getting into cinema, so maybe not as a kid, maybe as a kid, when I was first getting into cinema when I was around about 13, 14 years old, when I was watching a film, I sort of wanted it to go in one direction or another. I wanted to have like a solid answer at the end about whether things are real or not real or so on. And a lot of films I remember marking down, or as much as you mark it or whatever, I remember like them falling a bit in my estimation if things weren't really clear cut at the end of it, if things weren't neatly wrapped up. I sort of held that against the film, and it would make it a bit of a lesser favorite. Whereas for these days, ambiguity, leaving things open-ended, leaving things open for interpretation is something that really attracts me to a film. And I guess maybe that's just the experience of being a cinephile for over 20 years. The fact that you just need to rewatch these films because you've seen them half a lifetime ago. And if a film is just, this, and there's no room for interpretation, it's not going to make it more interesting to go back and revisit it. Whereas the films that are open-ended and the ones that are a bit more ambiguous, the ones which are totally unclear, we don't know what's going on. Like, I don't understand Videodrome. I think that's why it's my number one film of all time. I've seen it 14 times, I think, now. I have no idea what's going on. I know what's going on. There's bits and pieces of it I don't understand. That's what keeps drawing me back. And I think I prefer films these days like that I don't know everything. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand everything. I don't want a film to be clear-cut. I don't want to have clear answers to everything. There isn't really the attraction to go back and re-experience it.
I love that, Sol. I mean, I feel exactly the same way, that if something is not clear-cut, if there's mystery or if something is unclear, that just makes it so much more interesting to come back and experience again. And also because if something is left unresolved, very, very, very often it stays on your mind longer as well. I mean, in some cases, you have a memorable ending that ties everything together as well and becomes equally memorable. But just like as a rule of thumb, if you leave details vague or uncertain, they stay with you longer. So it's really interesting how you grew from or changed from loving the certainty and clarity to just embracing the unknown. For me, in terms, it's a bit hard to figure out what the biggest thing that changed. I guess I would just have to repeat what I said in my last answer, that the biggest change is that I went from enjoying films that kind of twisted the narrative or narrative conventions to films that twisted cinematic conventions. I think that's the very, very biggest change from when I first got into cinema, or at least the first few years I was into cinema, and now. Now, usually, I'm not even that interested in the story. I mean, obviously, if a film is story first, I can absolutely appreciate that, but usually the story is not what I'm overly drawn to or drawn to first in films anymore. I'm usually drawn to the atmosphere, the cinematic techniques, and just what the film is trying to do and tell and explore. So that's probably the absolute biggest change for me. Oh, and another one is, like, as I mentioned, that I've grown from finding like minimalism very, very cold and uninteresting. Like, I remember I had a really big issue with Bresson, for instance, when I first got into cinema. I thought, like, okay, this is too cut down. Like, why would you be this blunt with the cinema? It doesn't feel authentic. And oh yes, exactly. I didn't used to love artifice the way I do. Now I absolutely adore artifice and I adore things that feel different. Like, if you break something down, if it's more obvious that it's a film, or it's just more obvious that like it doesn't want to be seen as realistic, I'm far more likely to dive into it. Like, when I got into cinema, I loved Cassavetes, for instance. I mean, I still do, but like, that would be the kind of stuff I would really, really be drawn to. Today, like, Bresson would be far, far more higher up on that rank, while he was a director I was very mixed on. I wouldn't even have placed into my top 100 directors when I was 20s. Same with Duras. I mean, I've grown from, finding India's Song like immensely boring to just loving every second of it. It's a candidate for my top 10 films of all time. So that's some pretty big changes for me. I actually expected this topic to come up already, and I'm surprised it's not. I would like to know, like, what is it that you think triggers changes in taste? Do you think it's just the fact that we're watching so much and that we want something slightly different? Or do you think it could be age, life experience, or those gateway drugs I talked about earlier? I mean, we can start in alphabetical order again with you, Arthur.
It's definitely all of the above, at least for me. I find that with age, once you get to know yourself, you kind of know more of what you want in life, and that can be drifted towards media as well. With life events, we can all have like our own traumatic or positive experiences in life. With me, it was getting into those really big mental health issues, and For example, because of that, actually on top of an experience of taking mushrooms as well, I realized that you can't just avoid people all your life, and that aspect is very important, even if you're an introvert. So I tended to prefer the more people-oriented films. I could say, for example, I didn't care for Bergman really in my early 20s when I was going through all the canon stuff. And then rewatching Winter Light was just phenomenal. That's actually a director that I'll have to rewatch on top of people like Fellini and who's the director of like the Angel Exterminator? Buñuel, yes. Those three directors I'll have to rewatch for sure. I also find that, I know this will be a weird example, but when I play through all the Legend of Zelda video games, it's something that follows a formula, and I do think you kind of have to have something different eventually. And I think it's the same with all mediums, just like you said as one of the examples there of why people need that change. And for the last reason that you mentioned, with the gateway drugs, you'll definitely have those moments once in a while of this is almost a life-changing experience. For me, it was Doc Starman because it was something I've absolutely never seen before. And getting into political and social commentary was actually foreign films, especially African cinema, because it wasn't really something that you've thought about or explored before unless you've taken those topics in university or something. So yeah, it really is just life in general. Lots of different things can happen and your taste will evolve based off of that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much about right, to be honest, Arthur. Just a mix of all of the above. Though I didn't have any eureka moments while tripping on mushrooms. That's a pretty interesting way to realize that, hey, people actually are good. But I'm glad you had that realization. What about you, Ben? Did you have similar eureka moments to Arthur?
Not really. It was just sort of a gradual broadening. I do think there are mental development touchstones. As you get older, particularly in your teens, you start to, your mind starts to mature to an extent, right? And that informs the things that you like and don't like. You know, your opinions can mature over time. But as far as beyond that, I feel like my taste hasn't really evolved internally. It's more been based on external stimuli. So being exposed to things that I wasn't aware of before throughout my life is just, it's a slow broadening, right? Rather than a sudden, this is the way to go. Ace Ventura is not the greatest film of all time. It's actually The Godfather Part 2. That never happened.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the literal visual I've seen when I was on it to remember how important people are. I saw like people in a hot air balloon trying to reach for me, and then when I tried to grab them, they flew away, and then I was just isolated for the rest of the time. It's kind of interesting. I wouldn't recommend trying it, but it's basically diving head first into a therapy session.
Yeah, very interesting. It sounds like it was the therapy session you needed there as well, in a way, just opening you back up to people. And did you ever go in a hot air balloon after that?
I never went on one in my life, so I have a fear of heights.
You know, maybe you misread the vision and it was all about you fighting your fears of heights and hot air balloons instead.
Who knows? It's basically your brain being amplified, so maybe it was just interpretations. That all comes down to your dreams, right?
Yeah, quite possible. Yeah. What about you, Saul? I mean, did you ever have any dreams that changed how you viewed cinema or people or hot air balloons?
No, I don't think so. The main thing that I was going to bring up was something which Ben said about exposure. And for me, it's been about availability. I mean, I first got into cinema in the early 2000s, so that was still like a VHS era. DVDs were still quite new. Finding films to watch on the internet wasn't really a thing, and we've come so far in 2024. There's so many different streaming services. There's so many different ways to find films online. You get films that are posted all the time to places like YouTube and OK.ru. You've also got places like archive.org where a lot of classics can be found without having to try and find it on DVD. So just the availability of stuff that's out there these days has helped, I think, shape my taste quite a bit, because I'm sort of not just limited to what I'm able to rent out, which was back in the old days, or what I'm able to find to buy in VHS or DVD. It's sort of like whatever I want to search for out there. If somebody recommends a film these days, I can pretty much find it online, unless it's a very obscure film or a very new film. I can usually find a way to watch it. So I think that's really helped change the amount of films I'm watching and the sort of films that I'm watching, which is broadening my taste. In terms of the things that you talked about, Chris, you talked about gateway drug films. I mean, I guess there's a few examples I could use. I mean, Corpus Callosum got me into Michael Snow, for instance. Life experiences, I mean, there probably are a few things, but I guess for me, I don't really feel like I've had that many life experiences. I mean, I'm still a single guy without any kids, and sort of getting married, having kids are meant to be those sort of like two touchstone moments in your life that sort of like shift the way that you view films. Although bringing that along to the age thing, I found the horror film I was going to talk about before that I've forgotten was Poltergeist 3. When I first saw Poltergeist 3, I was the same age as the Carol Ann character, and that was just completely mind-blowing for me to be watching that film and seeing little girls about the same age as me being terrified by all these people who were like different in the mirror to how they were in reality. And then I rewatched that when I was the same age as the teenagers in the film, so about maybe 7 or 8 years older than her. And then I watched it a third time when I was close to the age of the parents in the film rather than the little kids. So it was just interesting watching it from that point of view. And it's sort of, you get drawn to different characters based on how you are. And film characters always remain the same age, but you yourself do end up changing. So I think you sort of identify with different characters as you get a little bit older. And I think even going to my favorite film, Videodrome, when I first saw it, I was much younger than Max Wren, the main character. I'm now actually technically older than he's meant to be in the film. And just those little things over there, I'm thinking, well, if I'm still rewatching that in, 30 years' time, am I going to be closer to the age of the old woman who sort of helps him sell the tapes and everything? And is that going to change my perception of it? I think it's quite an interesting thing. I mean, even going back to the Home Alone example, I was Macaulay Culkin's age, or probably a bit younger when I first saw the film. And now I'm probably old enough to be his father. I hate to think about that, but I am. And then you're sort of approaching it from a different point of view. And it's sort of like, well, that could be my kid if I was actually a parent, rather than that could be me as the child in there. So I guess the age thing is an inevitable factor in there about how you change. The way that you see films, just because films are static, but you're always watching it from a different point in your life. So I think that more than the gateway drugs or the life exposure or being exposed to more films, I think the age thing is just that inevitable thing that you can't help it. You are going to be seeing at different points in your life, and you are going to be identifying with different characters just because of that, unless it's a film without any characters.
So unless it's Michael Snow film, essentially, it's going to be very, very hard. That's very, very well put, Sol. It's absolutely right. Yeah, like I think most of us, when we watch a film, will be drawn to, if not absolutely personify ourselves, to some extent relate to the characters in different ways. And I mean, I do think it's possible to relate to the children even as you get older. I mean, I think for kids in the 90s, seeing Macaulay Culkin, for instance, they can think about, oh, this was my past, for instance. But I think you're absolutely right that the most normal thing, or natural thing to do is to, as you grow older, you see things from different perspectives, like especially if you like see those traditional tropes of kids rebelling against your parents when they're a teenager. You're probably going to be on the kid's side and relate to them and see their side of the story. When you're an adult, you're probably going to see the adult side, like if you have kids yourself and if you've gone through something similar, like you're probably going to see and take the adult side, and that's going to completely change certain dynamics and how you see those films. So that is beautifully put, Sol. And I think that's something that's almost inevitable. Like unless you're completely detached and you don't care about characters, or you just see them as individual characters without somehow managing to just leave yourself completely away from empathy, which I think is pretty near impossible. It's gonna happen. So I think you defined a point there that age, no matter what, like is stronger than all the others. Even if you've managed to stay away from all gateway drugs, even if you otherwise, stay the same, like that age is a factor that's going to change no matter what.
All I have to add to that is that kids can be brats now. I have little patience for them in films.
Kids have always been brats in films.
Yeah, and that ties into the life experience portion of my question as well. So it's clear that life experiences can also have a very, very big impact. I don't actually think that so far age or life experiences has had major changes for me. I mean, I don't have children yet, and I'm not a teacher, so I haven't gotten to that point where I immediately connect to the parents rather than the teenager. Maybe I become more of the uncle or the passive observer from the side in these difficulties. Who knows? But I do think that obviously as I get older, I do expect that some things are going to hit harder. I mean, I remember watching Umberto D as a teenager. Even then I was thinking like, yeah, this movie is great, but I wonder how I'll feel about this film when I'm 80. Like, I think that there are certain things that can hit harder or hit differently, or like just depending on what time in your life you are. I mean, for my part, I would say that biggest changes for me were probably those initial gateway films, like the fact that I saw Casablanca and went down like the Frankenstein route, went down like classic horror, like just taking me down that rabbit hole of just being really suddenly, first of all, invested in classic cinema, then just getting interested in New Hollywood. I think certain gateway films like Taxi Driver there too. I actually loved it. It was my favorite film for a while when I was a teenager. Like I think those gateway films had a pretty big impact on me as a teenager, just because I was like, oh, this is so different from what I've seen before. I just want to see more and more and more. And then pretty soon after that, I also watched Godard. And I think that the fact that I watched Godard that early probably also had some impact in what I saw and and like just how I ended up seeing cinema and caring about playing with cinema and cinematic techniques, etc. But beyond those early things, I think that the biggest change for me was exposure. Just seeing a lot of films. And to me, I would actually say that, yeah, cinema probably was a bit like a drug where I want a slightly different hit, like the same dosage or the same drug didn't do it quite the same way for me anymore, which is probably why suddenly now, like it's only been like maybe 4 or 5 years since I realized that, wow, like I love Duras, I love Bresson, like these really minimalist directors. That's something that really excites me and something that really captivates me. While when I first got into cinema, and probably for the first decade plus, that was something that I felt was more off-putting. I mean, that was a journey where I started to like more and more types of that kind of minimalism. I got more and more into Brechtianism, etc. as well. And at some point, I probably ended up just needing that slightly different hit. I think that's also why early on I went from I started very quickly wanting films that twisted expectations and twisted conventions as well, because I always wanted something to surprise me. I think that the more I watched, the more I was also put a little bit outside of the films and outside of the stories too, because the building blocks were just so familiar and I was looking at everything else there. So far for me, it's, like I said, gateway drugs and exposure. But as I age, I mean, I'm still just in my mid-30s, early mid-30s even. So that will probably kick harder in 6 years or so. Who knows?
Yeah, Chris, you actually jogged my memory about something. Another formative experience that informed my taste. And interestingly enough, this is on the I Check Movies Forum podcast. This is the first time on here we've actually brought up a list. When I was in high school, I came across the AFI Top 100 list the first time they published it, which was in I think 98. Basically, I just started renting the movies I could get a hold of from the local library. And the summer between 11th and 12th grade, I basically watched about a third of the AFI Top 100. And that basically, I think, is what first started exposing me to classic Hollywood. I had seen a handful of movies like Wizard of Oz before, but it kickstarted my lifelong dislike of Gone with the Wind, for instance. I watched a lot of the longer epics like Lawrence of Arabia and Ben-Hur. So I would say that was also an important part of my film going experience that helped me. It helped inform. First, it was my first real brush with getting obsessed with completing a list, which has continued on to this day. And probably most people on this have had that at some point. Otherwise, why are you even here? But also, it was also the first time I started seeing what I don't like. I'm not a fan of big, bloated historical epics, and being exposed to so many of them in a short period of time, it helped me to kind of start understanding, okay, I don't like these kinds of films. This is not my cup of tea. And so I think that was also an important part of growing up.
Yeah, I'd fully agree with you there. I think I Check Movies is a good indicator of you exploring that stuff because it's such a competitive website, and I don't think most users are like that anymore, but we were going through challenges and trying to watch 50 films a month just based off of one list is the challenge. But thinking about it, the peer pressure aspect, I think it works for all hobbies in general, where there was a YouTube video posted of the life cycles of a cinephile. And I think once you start taking a hobby seriously, you kind of reach a point where you take it too seriously. I remember there was an interview by Ethan Hawke, and he said he likes it when people are pretentious if they can make fun of themselves because they mean that they're trying to grow. But you have to reach the point where you look back at it and are kind of embarrassed about it. It kind of is an inevitable point of reaching a hobby and taking it seriously. I'd avoid anything from music that I deem too, quote unquote, normal. And it was kind of the same with movies as well. I just stuck with experimental films. I just kind of wanted to show off by trying to find the most obscure films possible and be like, oh, look how great those films actually are, which was kind of good. But yeah, it was basically cringy looking back at it. Looking back at a previous point, there is one film that I think wouldn't have worked when I saw it. Let me see the exact date I rated it. 17th of July, 2012. So I was 21 years old, and I watched my first Jonas Mekas film, the Occasionally I Saw Brief Glimpses of Beauty. I think seeing that in your late teens or early 20s, you're going to get almost nothing out of it. I've yet to rewatch it, but it's basically a film about family and memories and all that stuff, and I think you'll connect a lot more to the film when you reach your 30s or even 40s. So that film is definitely very high up on my rewatch list, and maybe in a future episode or something, we can bring up some points about it. It'll be curious to see how it is as we get older.
I think most of us are in agreement that age does affect the way that you appreciate a film. I guess the only thing that I'd say is that I don't like it when people say you're too young to understand a film. And I know definitely when I was in the IMDb message boards as a teenager, a lot of people had said, oh, well, when you're a parent, you'll get this film. When you're a little bit older, it'll make more sense to you. So I don't find that a particularly good defense of a film. I think a film should be able to give you different things at different ages. Maybe you'll see it slightly different when you're older or not, but I'll never use that as a defense. I would never use that as a justification of somebody who was trying to say that they didn't like a film. I wouldn't use the age thing because I think ageism does come into a little bit when you're communicating with people online and talk to them about films. I think there is a little bit of that in there, and I try to avoid that because like films should be something universal, but it's just inevitable that you will end up seeing films differently.
To be honest, those comments about you're just too young, you appreciate it when you're older, or you just need to watch movies for another 5-10 years. So those kinds of comments, those are just usually these lazy, dismissive comments that people used to give back in height of the message board era. I mean, it's pretty much nonsense because, I've met 14-year-olds who were watching Godard and Tarkovsky, etc. Early on, when ICM Forum got started, like half of the people there were either teenagers or early 20s. A lot of these film message boards are usually just filled with teenagers. I mean, I got into cinema when I was 15, 16 properly. I started getting really into Godard when I was late 16, 17. So like, and that's a pretty common experience. Like if you don't like Godard when you're 16, 17 or 20, like there's no reason why you like him at 30 or 40. If you don't like Tarkovsky at 16 or 20, there's no reason why you're going to like Tarkovsky when you're 40. Like I don't think that tracks. I do think it's possible. I think that it's very, very possible that people who watch certain films, like I watched Bresson films when I was 16, 17, 18, it's probably around there. Probably, like, definitely watched several Bresson films when I was a teenager. And I did like some, but a lot of them I just thought, oh, no, that this is, like, why is it shot this way? Like, why are they acting this way? Why are they reading in a monotone voice? And my reaction was essentially like, this is just some weird, pretentious thing that doesn't make sense. It doesn't give me anything. Now, I absolutely love that. I love anything that challenges the norms of storytelling like that, or just cuts everything down bare bone. I absolutely love that. I think the idea of pretension is another thing that got thrown around a lot on those message boards. And I think pretension is probably a thing to a point where people are just trying to either be slow or to do certain things that look flashy or impressive when they don't really have any ideas. But usually what's called pretentious are just people playing around with cinema or doing something different or engaging. And that's nonsense as well. I mean, I think that's pretty much just two sides of the same coin. One side essentially calling people childish or ignorant or stupid, and the other side saying that people who like something else are just pretending. And so some of you said that, yeah, you were kind of forcing yourself to like things you weren't fully liking at that age. And that makes sense as well. And that's probably what gives ear to some of these arguments too, just because I think that there is a push to kind of fit in, and there's a counter push to fit in, and then there's different groups and different things you should like to be in those groups. And I guess that's part of growing up online. Luckily, we're not. I mean, maybe we're always growing up online since it's mid-2020s and we're still online and we're recording this podcast online. It's going to be published online and we're never done growing up. But I hope that all of us know ourselves well enough to not be influenced that way anymore. But I think that no matter what film you're talking about, usually there are people who genuinely like it no matter what, from the trashiest of horror to the most difficult, if you want to say it, type of experimental film. Like I know, like Saul loves horror, Saul loves Michael Snow. Like there's no pretension about that, and I mean he's not even interested, for instance, watching something by Ackerman, which we've covered in another episode. So I think that the accusation of pretension, if you like something that's a little bit out of the norm, is just one of those other things that people who are often just insecure about their own taste throw out.
Yeah, I find that was basically my big summary. Like, just like Soul, I can watch the dumbest horror films, or I can watch the most experimental films out there. I just wanted to provide somewhat of a defense of the brief glimpses of beauty point that I made. I didn't even rewatch the film, so it's kind of a weird defense, especially because we're not doing an episode on it. But there was like a group of people in Rachel music called Avant-Teens, so I do understand that there are people that love Godard when they were very young, and it's completely valid and everything. I just think that with this film, it's basically, all about the memories you've had and looking back on them. And I think it's just something that you can connect with more as you get older, because you have more life experiences and can look back on those memories. And that's not really something you could do as effectively, I guess you could say, when you're younger.
I think that might be true, but I think it's also possible that it's also reversed, that it's kind of like you see your future life in a way as well. I mean, I remember Synecdoche in New York. I mean, it's not the same thing, but I remember that hitting me quite hard when I was in my 20s. This kind of just existential horror of growing old and doing all of the wrong things, and a time just flying by you. Like that still hit me as when I was fairly young. Actually, I was a teenager when that came out. So I saw it as soon as it came out. I think I was 17. That still hit me then. In terms of as I was moving ahead, occasionally I saw brief glimpses of beauty. Yeah, I saw that probably 7 years ago. I was in my mid-20s, late 20s. I liked it a lot. I mean, Mekals is one of those directors that I don't fully love, but he does a lot of interesting things. And there's a lot of I think heartwarming things in that. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe when we're in our 60s, and we're still doing this podcast, we can see that and it will hit me much harder. But I still think that just this idea of it's almost diary-esque. These are beautiful memories he's had. These are connections he's made. I think that can be appealing regardless of age, to be honest, as well. I mean, I loved Umberto D as a teenager as well. I think, and again, looking at his forums, most of the people who I was at those forums with were similarly teenagers or early 20s, and they were loving these movies too. I think everything's possible, to be honest. But yeah, there's probably films you will enjoy more, or more people enjoy more as they get older, and some films that people will enjoy more when they're younger. But I wouldn't it's probably true statistically, but I don't want to punt at which those are. You might be right about this one though.
So the only other point I thought I'd make, just with the idea of pretension and approaching films when you're younger compared to when you're older, I think when you're first getting into cinema, it's hard not to sort of react to the way that certain films are being praised and being celebrated, and you're going out and seeing these films, and when they don't work for you, it's sort of there's a little bit of a pressure there to get defensive about it, or to maybe back away and not actually see films like that if those sort of films aren't doing it for you. But I guess for me, I think the evolution part for me, and which I did mention a bit with Mulholland Drive earlier on, it's just trying to take the film for what it is, trying to take it for the experience. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do these days, is I'm not looking to watch a film and to give it, a 4.5 or 5 or a 4-star rating and log in and have it in my best of all time list or whatever. I'm just sort of trying to approach films for the experience of it. So I think that's something that's easier to do when you get more into the medium and we just get past all the sort of entry level films, and you get a bit more invested into when you're about 20 or 25 years into this hobby of film watching. It sort of becomes more about, I want to go out there and just experience the film. I don't want to go out there, have this film and go, oh no, in my mind, oh no, I'm not going to be able to give it a 10 out of 10 or what's going wrong or whatever like that. It's just about seeing the films for themselves. And I guess that's something I'm finding more often because I'm watching a lot of films on the big screen these days. And I keep pushing for a podcast, but it doesn't seem to be happening because I'm just very lucky that Perth, the city that I'm living in, has got 3 major cinemas. Well, not major, but they've got 3, art house-ish cinemas who are really pushing and competing against each other's and getting all these classics on the big screen. So I'm just watching and rewatching everything, regardless of what I thought about when I'm younger, just for the ability to experience it. And I think that's sort of where I am in my movie watching journey. I mean, there were definitely a few years where everything was very competitive for me, with all the challenges on the forum, with the iCheck movie lists and trying to not complete them, but getting close to completing them and trying to get into the top 100 users, which I actually have made on iCheck movies now. But for me, I'm trying to watch films now for the experience of it, rather than to almost complete a list or to win a challenge or to try and work out if it's in my top 10 or top 20 of the year or whatever. I'm trying to do things more for the experience of it, and I'm hoping as I get older, I become even more open-minded in that regard.
Yeah, that's great. For what everyone's saying, that's a very similar experience to them, where early on they were pressured to see certain films I felt pressure to see certain films too. Like I really want to be part of every conversation. I felt left out if I hadn't seen X classic or X big film that had just come out. I still probably have completed tendencies more than you, Saul. I mean, I'm probably far more likely than you to want to complete a list because I know you hate completing a list. You don't have that interest. But this idea that that pressure is gone, that we all become more comfortable with what we like and don't feel the same need to go out of our way to watch things we don't like, or we don't feel the same pressure to react to them in certain ways. I think that's absolutely great, and that really shows how taste or just viewing choices or just how we express ourselves change as we become more comfortable and learn to know ourselves and just grow up. So that's absolutely amazing to see, and to lure us down like this hallway to the end of the episode here. In my intro, I did compare cinema to drugs, and I mean, I said myself that to me, cinema is very similar to a drug, where I at least built up a higher and higher tolerance as I watched more, and I wanted something different. And like the more I was watching, the more I wanted films to be different from the norm, the more I wanted to dive into specific niches. Like for me personally, that ended up leaning into more artificial and art house films. I still haven't gotten fully experimental. You like far more experimental stuff than me, Saul, but at the same time, you're not that into the art house stuff as me. So that's a really interesting side of the scale. But I would be interested in knowing to what extent you guys feel that that's the case for you, that cinema is a bit of a drug, that you build up a tolerance and that you want something different. And do you think that it's inevitable that, like, if you watch 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 plus films at some point during that journey, that you just want more, you want it heavier? Like, if you watch enough films, actually, will you be snorting snow in the back alley, or taping your eyelids so that you cannot look away while watching Hostel in an abandoned warehouse? Like, whatever your niche or interests are, like, do you think you've been pushed into that rabbit hole where you are more and more interested in extremes or specific niches, or just wanting something more from cinema than you did before?
Basically, I remember my first time I appeared on this podcast, there was that moment where I talked about kind of being done with films because they were all the same, and just basically having an overload of them. So I found myself kind of drifting towards other genres, which I guess you could say it's kind of like a gateway drug in a way. I'm leaning towards horror and action films now, trying to find the gems from there, and even stuff like failed blockbusters. It's something that gives me that different kick and something that I want to explore more. At the same time, I am rewatching a few things, but it's only stuff that I feel like I'll get something different out of it this time, if it's like the life experiences that we mentioned before, or just having better media literacy skills. Now at my age and seeing, I think it's 8,500 films, I just need to get something different out of it.
Yeah, I remember that conversation, and I'm glad you managed to find that new way to enjoy cinema, and just that change managed to reignite that spark for you. What about you, Ben? Do you feel like your exposure to films have pushed you to enjoy or be interested in or seek out more extreme versions of what you used to like? Or to follow Arthur's example and just jump into something completely different?
If anything, it's been the opposite. When I was in college, I had that more hard ride into experimental and extreme horror, watching stuff like the guinea pig movies. You know, like I've said before, at some point it just kind of hit me. I just don't like these. These aren't fun to watch. This is miserable. Why would I watch something that makes me miserable? And so I think now I try to pursue a film. The ones that really scratch that itch are the ones that are the most fun or meaningful or fascinating. They're not the ones that are, what the hell is this? I'm just perpetually confused or disgusted the entire time. I don't find those interesting anymore. That's not to say I don't like experimental film anymore, but I'm definitely a lot more selective, and it needs to have some sort of, there are certain ones that I have a visceral reaction to in a positive way that I'm fine with, and others that just completely shut me down. And I'm a lot more discriminating as I get older.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that, Ben, because it would be a bit boring if we all were the same, we all were pushed to more extremes. But rather than that, you just cut things out instead and focus on the basics. So just to be clear, even with the horror, you've never been driven into like specific subcategories or gotten bored of the big mainstream horror films. Like you're still, like there hasn't really been that big shift for you at all?
I mean, I'm not as into some of the really popular, that, you know, even stuff like Smile last year or the Conjuring movies, I can enjoy those on a certain level. They're not amazing movies. They're not my favorites or anything, but they're fine. I'm not miserable while I'm watching them. And to me, that's preferable than watching something like Dying at Grace, where I am miserable the entire time I'm watching it. At a certain point, with something like Dying at Grace, you know, you just have to say, why am I watching this? What is interesting about watching elderly people slowly die over and over again? You could say, well, there's a meaning to it, and it makes you appreciate the life you have, etc. I can appreciate the life I have without just watching old people die in real time. I don't need to watch that to have my life enriched. It's fine.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I quite like Dying at Grace. It was powerful, though. That does get a bit repetitive as well. But to me, it's a very good film. I mean, I think that like when I was a teenager, I was really, really drawn to films that were misanthropic and dark, and I wanted that miserable feeling. I think a lot of teenagers are drawn to the same thing as well. But I might also have some tolerance to this stuff. I mean, I think I mentioned in the previous episode that I hate torture porn. Like I can't really watch that stuff. But things like Dying at Grace, which is just mystery without, or tragedy without the blood and the gore, that I'm okay with. So I guess different things can make us want to avoid them.
To me, Dying at Grace is a form of torture porn. It's a fixation on human suffering.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate, just without the gore. I would agree with that, yeah. What about you, Saul? What are your thoughts on any of the somewhat free flow of things you've been talking about so far? Or to drag us back to my original question, whether or not you think cinema is in any way closer to a drug where we build up tolerance along the way. I mean, from both Arthur and Ben, it seems like that's not the case for them. So it would be interesting to hear how you feel about that.
I think this is an interesting question for you to throw in at the end of the episode, because it makes me think about something that's going to sound controversial for me to state, and something that maybe could be part of another podcast. But I sort of feel that with some sort of movements like art house, Chris, and film minimalism in particular, I feel that the film goers who are drawn to that are sort of the ones who sort of gotten over traditional narrative cinema and have sort of got a bit tired or a bit bored of it, and therefore they're looking for things which aren't theoretically cinematic. I mean, film minimalism by definition is sort of like the reverse, it's sort of like the antithesis of what cinema actually is. Cinema is being like a really big audio visual assault on the senses, having lots of things going on at once, with music, with sound design, with cinematography, with action, with dialogue. There's so many things you can put into a film, and then film minimalism draws it all out. That just like dilutes everything else. So for me, I can't get into that, because for me, that's just the antithesis of what cinema is. But yet there are definitely some people who have reached that point. And there are some people, I think the people who just mainly watch experimental films, I sort of like wonder, are they just bored of narrative cinema? And I guess to me, I'm not bored of narrative cinema. I mean, I watch a lot of slashers. I know a lot of slashers are very samey, but also a lot of slashers just play well into things like fear, anxiety, paranoia, things that I experience myself on an everyday basis, things that I can really relate to. So I think I'll keep still watching narrative cinema, I mean, my taste has narrowed down over the years as I've come used to sort of films I'm looking at, even though my taste has broadened out. It's sort of like narrowed down the films that I know I'm going to enjoy. So I think I'm going to keep just seeking out those narrative films. I don't see myself becoming a film minimalism or an art house viewer at any sort of point. Because I guess to me that's sort of like when you take off and go, all this narrative cinema, all this traditional cinema is not doing anything for me. I have to explore the other avenues. So I mean, I've dipped my toe in the other avenues, and they don't really do that much for me. I mean, I do like Michael Snow, but for me, that's the playfulness. It's the comedy, and I'm always going to be, I think, a big comedy fan. It's just part of the way that I've come to appreciate cinema. One of the most powerful things a film can do is to make you laugh. It's an uncontrollable emotion. It's something that when a film can actually elicit laughter out of you, it's something which is beyond your control. It actually has the power to do that for you. So I'm always going to be into comedy, always going to be into things that are playful. But yeah, I don't think, even though I've seen lots of films, and even though I've built up a tolerance to maybe, I was chatting with Ben in the chat about film noir and how I'm not really that big into noir because a lot of them are very samey, even though I've got a bit of like a tolerance, because even though I've seen a lot of things, I still don't think I'm looking for a completely new thing each time. I mean, I do sort of generally look for films which are going to be audiovisual assaults on the senses. That's my sort of like go there film. That'll be the biggest thing a film could be for me, is something which is really anxiety driven and very audio and very visual based. I'm not always going to be searching for something different for something else. I'm not sort of searching for that next fix out there, the next thing which is going to take me to a higher and higher and higher and higher and higher level. I'm okay with watching some stuff which is similar to what I've seen before, some comfort films. I'm still happy with that sort of like comfort, like slasher genre. I'm still happy with that. I'm still happy with seeing new slasher films, new goofy comedies, new psychological thrillers. I'm still interested in seeing those, even though there are some of the things that I've seen before. So I don't feel the need to say, well, look, I've conquered this. I need to find something completely different in cinema. I guess maybe I found the niche. And I'm completely happy with that. And that might change as I get older. It might change as I have life experiences. But where I am kind of happy with where I am at the moment. I'm not feeling that need to keep pushing for a different sort of film experience beyond what I'm getting at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. So essentially, you never got pushed into any of those extremes. That's absolutely amazing. For me, like I mentioned earlier, I don't really even need to repeat myself there. I think that I still love some films in large part because of their narratives, but like Children of Paradise is still one of my absolute all-time favorite films. I mean, I still absolutely love a lot of classic Hollywood. I still love Scorsese. I still love The Godfather. Like, I haven't really lost love for any of the films that are more conventional narratives as my taste at all. It's the more that I've got more and more excited by the visual side of things, the cinematic form side of things, and that some of those sparks my interest usually a little bit more. Like, it's going to be very, very hard for a film to completely win me over solely because of the dialogue, story, and acting. Usually I'll also need a visual element. Like, I can think you're a great movie on that basis, but in almost every situation I'll need something special from the visual. Like, I'm not over narrative cinema. I still love narrative cinema. There's a lot of narrative films that are shot beautifully and they just shoot up my list, and they're some of my favorite films of all time. But I have noticed that as I've gotten older, that yes, a lot of like anti-cinema, as you say, that's not all I'm looking for. Definitely not. I mean, there's so few proper anti-cinema films that I'm really excited about. But I think I remember in the What Is Taste episode, I mentioned that, I should have mentioned this on The Biggest Change, actually, because it is one of them. Like, when I was younger, I absolutely hated Dogma. Like, I was a very visual person. I wanted films that were well made and beautifully shot. But as I got older, I also found that it's really exciting to see films that have more raw, dirty, like consciously ugly looks. Like, those can also be absolutely phenomenal. So, films from like the Cinema Marginal movement in Brazil, especially Rogério Cancela, I guess you pronounce his name. Like Dogma flew up my interest as well. I love what you could call anti-cinema does really interest me, just because it's raw, it's rough, but that's not the end of the line for sure. It took probably a decent bit of viewing before I wanted that extra hit, and that is probably the drug part thing I talked about, that, hey, this is something different, this is something exciting, it's gonna rough you up. But if you want to compare it to drugs, it's like, okay, occasionally, like usually you're into weed, but sometimes you go out and you snort cocaine or something like that. I've never actually tried any heavy drugs. I don't have a proper accurate metaphor there. I'm too straight-laced for that, I guess. But in cinema, I'm not. I'll go all the way out with with some of the craziest joints out there. But I've never gotten as into experimental cinema as Saw, for instance. Like we talked about that recently too. Like Region Central, for instance. That's a film I actively dislike. Like films that are experimental just for being experimental, drag things out. I'm not into Andy Warhol at all. Like I haven't, like, maybe I'll get there eventually. Maybe I'll take so many hits from the anti-cinema and from the art house stuff that I'll end up there. But for me, it's not just about it being anti-cinema. I just want a really memorable audiovisual experience. And I guess what I'm drawn to there has just opened up more as I've gotten older. In some ways, it's narrowed down as I've been more specifically drawn to art house, but in some ways, it also opened up more.
If you want anti-films, definitely check out So Bad It's Good director named David Dakota. I remember his film Bigfoot vs. D.B. Cooper. The opening scene was 10 minutes of walking, which ended on nothing. Then one scene of dialogue, which lasted maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Then a guy showering for 5 minutes. And then people pointing guns at a mirror while flexing in their underwear for like 25 minutes. It kind of became interesting watches because of how anti-film they were.
Who knows? Again, maybe if I take enough shots of this drug, I'll end up there. But at the moment, that doesn't sound super appealing either. And I can add, just adding to what Ben said earlier, that like even with a lot of minimalist stuff, like once you see more and more of something, you also see more of what's good, what's not, what you like and what you don't. And there's a lot of slow cinema that probably would have really impressed me a decade ago. That doesn't impress me at all and feels dull now. A bit similar to how when I was a teenager, like I thought Ghost of Frankenstein and House of Frankenstein, those films were like, oh wow, this is so cool. But then I realized, oh yeah, this is just like not very special compared to what else was being made. So new benchmarks are being made and discovered.
I do kind of wonder with some of the people who are into film minimalism and the people who are just so over what narrative cinema has to offer, whether the joke film Paint Drying, one of the most famous films on Letterboxd, which was made because the guy knew that the censors would have to watch all however many hours of it before giving it a rating. They'll have to watch the entire thing, so he sort of made it as an FU to them. Whether a film like Paint Dry will become the ultimate film to watch because it's just so anti everything. If you are one of those people that evolve to that stage, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be, but I know some people are at that stage or getting towards it.
Oof. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever get there, but who knows? I mean, I haven't even gotten to the stage of even attempting to watch Empire. Like, I haven't even wanted to attempt it. And it feels like Paint Drying is one step further. But do let us know there, listener, if you have gotten to that step, or if you think that's a step you'll ever get to, or if you think the idea of steps makes sense at all. Because from what we've discussed here in this episode, it seems like no. Like, there might be no steps. There might be discoveries along the way. There might be gateway films. There might be life experiences or just things or just the fact that you age that's going to change how you view a film. And you might build up some tolerance, like me, and be drawn to slightly different things the more you watch. But there's no set rules, clearly, based on my 3 co-hosts here today. So we would just be really interested in hearing from you. Like, what was your journey? Did you feel it was step by step? Did you feel you were building up tolerance? Or are you exactly the same as you were? Hit us up on icmforum.com. There'll be a thread set up for this episode where you can just share your experiences and how your taste evolved, or if it never did, because that's just as interesting. So yeah, shoot us a message. Thank you for listening, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.